came into office exactly 6 months to election. Given the intricacies and complexity of our election system, it is humanly impossible to completely understand the process and run it as a person who has final responsibility. We had to purely rely on the advice and guidance of Secretariat. But at the end of the day, if things go wrong, it's the commissioners to carry the responsibility. That's why we are saying it is important that at any given time, there must be a mix of new and old commissioners in terms of those who have already conducted election, who will guide and transfer knowledge to the new commissioners, who will get a chance to conduct election while their colleagues are still in office. Then when the term of this one ends, the others take over and they continue with that institutional memory.
Right, that is IEBC Commissioner Boya Molu earlier today as IEBC appeared before the Senate Justice and Legal Affairs Committee, just taking a look at their conduct during the 2017 general election, how they oversaw their mandate, and just taking internally a look at their state and their composition now. There are very crucial roles that this body is expected to oversee in the coming months. There's a delimitation of boundaries, a possible referendum. What is the state of the IEBC to conduct its mandate? That is our big story tonight. Many thanks for joining us. My name is Sharon Momanya. I will be having a conversation with my panel here in studio in just a bit. But just before then, to set this conversation, our lead reporter, Sophia Wanuna, starts this conversation with us. She will be having a conversation with the chair of Senate, JLAC, Samson Cherargei. Good evening, Sophia.
Good evening, Sharon. So earlier this year, the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission released a report on the evaluation of how the 2017 general election was conducted, lessons learned going forward, what are the measures they're hoping to put in place, but also the successes according to the IEBC in that election. But for many Kenyans, what they will remember is that this commission came into office just 6 months to the general election last year. There was also a lot of legislation, weighty legislation that was passed just months in the lead up to the general election. And I mentioned this too because very important. Remember the Kriegler report, and Commission had advised that going forward in future elections to avert the kind of violence and fallout witnessed in elections, that this kind of measures, whether it's the commissioners or electoral laws, are put in place way in advance to allow everything to be settled and good preparations put in place. But also for the 2017 election, a big one for Kenyans to remember is the annulment of the presidential election, the first one being annulled. And so today, the commissioners, and remember now, because again of the fallout within the commission, several of them resigning, those still in office appeared before the Senate committee, that is the Justice and Legal Affairs Committee that's chaired by Senator Samson Cherargei. He joins me now to talk a little bit more about what this team had to say to his commission and what they see as the way forward as 2022 is fast approaching. Thank you, Senator, for making time for the big story tonight. So I've mentioned some of the things many Kenyans will remember from the 2017 elections, and those were concerning issues. But perhaps right now the concern is, even at the time, we already knew not to do those things, but the leadership failed Kenyans in that we still had commissioners come into office late, still laws passing late. So even this evaluation, will it really make a difference? Will we not end up doing what politicians will want to do in the last minute?
I agree, and today we are doing stock taking. I know you cannot legislate trust. You know, the issue in Kenya is because we don't trust each other, we don't trust technology, we don't trust politicians, we don't trust IEBC. And the question we're asking today is, how do we redeem that image of IEBC? Because there is low public confidence, we need credibility. When you look at Article 81 of the Constitution of Kenya on the role of IEBC, the election should be simple, should be accurate, should be transparent. transparent. You saw there was election, although the proportionate elections that were being done in South Africa, and you hardly saw any problem. So we realize when you look at the report that IEBC presented, over 90% everything is okay when opening of ballot papers, ballot boxes. The problem comes when there is transmission of presidential election. But anything else, even by the time a voter votes, the polling clerks, the polling station, the counting and everything. But when it comes to transmission of presidential election, that is where the problem is. And they came with the evaluation report on the general election, on the fresh presidential elections. But you know, at the end of the day, it looks like academic document. I want to agree with you because we might, and I know we have not taken position as parliament, we might decide to reconstitute the IEBC, and the commissioners who are already in office might leave, the secretariat might leave. So when new people come, it will just look like an academic document. Mind you, these commissioners who are in office came 6 months barely to the general elections. And those although their proposals are being borrowed heavily from the curricular report and also the Orengo-led Kraitu Committee of the Joint Parliamentary Committee, and we are trying to as Senate and as the National Assembly, where we are going to have a joint of both JLAC in the Senate and the National Assembly, we are trying to follow up on those resolutions so that we can put it in policy and put it in legislative agenda for the reforms of elections. Because when an election cycle ends, for example, in 2017, 2022 election cycle begins. And you know, apart from even financing, logistics, and many other issues of credibility, there are so many issues that at the end of the day, as Kenyans, as we have said, the IEBC will continue being a dangerous or a time bomb in terms of the unity and the cohesiveness and the peace of the country.
Yes. Let's talk about also, of course, the sticky area on servers, technology from that election. Did they present to you an audit of just what happened? Because one of the biggest issues in the presidential election petition was we want the servers open, we want to know what's going on, and all these stories about where they are. So do we finally know what's in those servers? Is there an audit of what was happening at the time?
You know, the challenge they raise is that that they didn't have funds to do the audit of these election servers. And I know servers was a very serious issue that everybody was demanding that we open servers. And that's where the problem is, because I've said from the polling station, the voter, there's no problem. But when it comes to transmitting results, especially on presidential national tallying center at Bomas or wherever they will use, there is a problem. Let me use an example. When you look at Section 39C elections amendment of 2017, one of the key things was that the elections at the lowest level or at the polling station, because they have over 40,000 polling stations, is they need to scan a document as send a document. They went ahead. They didn't have a discretion of Section 39 or C1 to change, because they were not given that time. So they came back and say, you know, there are 11,000 polling stations that the 3G network did not apply. They even bought satellite phones, but did not work. So they end up changing from a scanned document to send via the phone to a text of the tabulated results. And for example, those ones were some of the audit questions that we wanted to know about the technology. You can see the supplier, even some of suppliers of this technology, they still being owed by the IEBC. But the IEBC are saying we don't have enough funds to audit their technology systems. And these are some of the challenges that we are looking into. And if we maintain even this technology, by 2022 it shall be obsolete. And these are some of the critical, because we thought the technology should come and assist, because we are now doing 6 elections in one day, and therefore we expect the technology to assist in expeditious processing of releasing of results. Because if it is timely, we are looking into a Kenya where if I lose an election, I should accept as a loser. If you win, you accept as a winner, because we know it's credible and transparent. So the technology issue has not been answered. No one has audited. The servers are yet to be opened.
So let me ask you this then. When they say they haven't audited because they do not have money, what measures have been put in place? Have they given an assurance? Has Parliament said then they will provide the necessary funding, requisite funding, to ensure this audit is done? Because we're going to another election without looking back into that, without an audit, then we'll be kidding ourselves.
Because those are some of the questions that we gave them up to 27th of May 2019 to come back with a comprehensive report and ensure that we work on this issue of technology, because we need an audit. We need to know why it went wrong, because I have used an example of Section 39C1 where they were not given discretion of what they did about 11,000 polling stations by using an SMS or a text, as opposed as what the law had provided, that it's tabulated and scanned document and sent to the National Tallying Center. So those are some of the critical. Everybody wants to know what happened with servers.
But where will the money come from? If they're saying they don't have money, you're saying you're giving them up to 27th. Where is the last? They'll say they don't have money again.
You know, the parliament now, there's a discussion of division of revenue, and it is now, there was no concurrence between the Senate and the National Assembly. So my worry, it will go to mediation and may collapse. That can lead even to the shutdown of the government, because as Senate we have stood our ground that 335 billion should remain, that is allocated as an equitable shareable revenue across the counties. So we in the allocation that was done by the budgetary committee and even through the JLAC of National Assembly, they didn't provide for that money. So we need them to give us an official report that the reason they can't audit is because they don't provide. But the question we asked them, as they were planning to be allocated money in the general elections and in the fresh presidential elections, did they allocate some of the money for their own audit of these systems? Yeah. Which we need now. We told them they must come with evidence, maybe the letters they wrote to the treasury, the letters that were internal that they wrote about how they can do it. Yet they should have allocated that money by the time they were being allocated the money that were being taken to general elections and the fresh presidential elections of 26 October 2017.
Yeah, you mentioned about the technology may be obsolete by 2022, and there's still money going into maintaining of the same. Shouldn't we then be saying, now that we're done with that, look into what 2022 will look like, and why did we even get technology that will not be able? Is it possible to have an upgrade? Perhaps I get lost in the technological aspects of it all.
You know, the BVR kits, you remember the biometric voter registration kits, the KIMS kits, at some point even collapsed. That's why there was a problem between for example, you can find two people had similar ID, but when you went to biometric details, you get that two different people. The KIMS and the BVR kits, the technology with time becomes obsolete. Technology is one of the dynamic aspects in our life today. So and it is shocking that's why we have told them to come up with evidence, because we have seen in some of the presentations on the pending bills, some of the providers of technology still being owed by the IEBC. So we want to understand, why are they paying these service providers for technology on the work they did in general election and 27 fresh presidential election 27 October 2017, or they are paying for the maintenance? Because I have shown you some of the documents that shows that the IEBC might need to be paying for the technology, for the maintenance of some of this technology, and we know by that time it will be obsolete by 2022, and those are some of the critical issues that we need to agree. Even the solution is not reconstituting IEBC as per se, maybe of having new commissioners or having new secretariat. There is a more inherent problem within the IEBC that we need as a country, in line with the provisions of Article 81, that we need to set a more systems that are more credible. Changing the face, and yet the other systems until its face is big a challenge.
Yeah.
Yes.
And also what was worrying to hear is the IEBC talking about going forward in as far as procurement, that they will be required to go through the Ministry of ICT. That's government. They're an independent commission. So does that worry you as chair of JLAC?
Yeah, it worries me a lot, because we have always argued, and I think even when this issue of corruption was a hot potato in the country, everybody was arguing that let us leave independent commissions that has been created by a constitution to do their work independently. But when a government issues directive that all ICT related or technology procurements is that they should be procured through the ICT, the Ministry of ICT, then we have a bigger problem, because how independent will IEBC be if you are interfering? We are saying you are an executive. Maybe the person who is in executive might be contesting for a presidential election in the future, yet the person procuring that ICT is one of the contenders for that presidential election. So in as much as IEBC, you remember also when you ask about procurement, apart from the ICT, the IEBC, most of its procurement procedures were being thrown out by the courts of law. It became because of lack of public participation, and they are saying in the future their way forward was that they will try and conduct a public participation more openly, because you remember in one instance the procurement of some of the materials they needed were cancelled by the courts of law, because even they are saying the purchase or procurement of technology, they needed to be done on times, even 1 year before, so that even contestants can test You can do even a mock election. You can say, as a contestant of presidency or even a cabineterial, you can walk to IEBC office and you say, I want to test this new technology that you have purchased so that we can have the credibility. But when you procure, for example, they procure that technology a few months or a few days, and they were telling all presidential contestants, people are campaigning outside there, and you're telling them, come and check the technology. So we agree that even, we of course, my worry is that the ministry and the government should never issue a directive to an independent commissions that they need to procure any service through them, because they'll be interfering with their independence.
Yeah. And many times we've seen changes in as far as the commissioners for IEBC. But one of the issues that I remember the Chair Chebukati addressed following the annulment of the presidential election was that there had little had been done in the secretariat. And there was an invitation to the DPP to look at, whilst now we know the CEO is out, but what are we doing to ensure even the secretariat is being vetted, that there's a relook there to ensure it's the entire system and commission that is working properly?
They assured us that they are doing internal vetting of the IEBC officers, and the report will be made public. I hope the media and the committee and the Kenyans at large will have access to that report. Secondly, that is why we are now trying to have in talks with the JLAC of National Assembly and ourselves on the way forward, on a joint legislative and policy proposals to ensure how can we reconstitute the commission, number one. Number two, to also reconstitute the secretariat, because all this secretariat has been a problem because of that tug of war between the chairman and the secretariat. It's not necessarily the individual that is the chair or individual that is the CEO of the secretariat. So that, you know, the inherent problem is that we might see the face of commissioners, but the problem could be within the commission. Yeah. So we want to agree on the legislative proposals on how to...
But sir, let me interject there, because the last time we spoke, and I think, was it last year or perhaps earlier this year, you said you were still engaging with the National Assembly. So one would wonder, is a political will, is a political class serious? Because right now the president, yes, even if he acknowledged those resignations, which he never has, yes, he's tied because his hands are tied. One would argue there is no legislation to allow for a mechanism to hire, recruit new commissioners. So we keep hearing, we are working, we are consulting. Time is going, literally moving really fast. So it appears from an observer there simply is no political will, and that this will work to meet certain interests at the end of the day and not Kenyans.
You know, National Assembly, as even the JLAC have published a bill. It is all of us to have a consensus, and we are looking. I want to assure you, as you have said, this thing needs political goodwill. As now, you know, one funny thing with this country is that we become more active when things are almost deadline. For example, now I would have expected even political parties and other, even NGOs, observers should be pushing us and even coming to a stakeholders meeting where we can agree on the proposals. But the problem in this country, I was agreed, there is no political goodwill. Even you can see replacing those IEBC commissions that have resigned has become a problem. So I agree with you that, but I want to assure you on this finality, yes, that as the JLAC of the Senate and the National Assembly, within the next 1 month, we will sit and publish a bill on agreeable proposals on how to review. But you know, the buck stops with us politicians. Mm-hmm. If there is a good political goodwill, and I'm happy now there is a handshake, it is even easy to do a bipartisan on some of these critical issues. Because I remember, and I always challenge our colleagues who are now partners, they are no longer opponents or opposition in parliament, that one of the agenda that they call for the resistance or resist at that time was electoral justice. We want to see those proposals at electoral justice, but they told us we wait for the Building Bridges initiative, because I'm told we should wait for them also so that they can give their view. Yes. But as Parliament, we'll do our bit. But even as these stakeholders of BBI and others are coming on board, and other stakeholders, election observers, donors and funders to this process, we must come up together and ensure that, yes, we resolve this issue. I agree with you, it needs political goodwill.
Yes. Final question, and briefly, going forward, the IEBC is proposing a longer time from the 14 days in as far as deciding a presidential election petition, and they also want the elections staggered so that the national and the county elections are not on the same day. These proposals agreeable to you?
No, it's not agreeable, because even as we discuss, it is expensive to do an election in Kenya. Per vote, I think it's around $1, more than $1. We need to relook, because staggering elections will be more expensive, it will be more complicated, it will bring a lot of issues, because unless we stagger within months or within years, so that we have county elections elections on a different date and national elections on a different date. So staggering of elections, we need to weigh, but I don't see any reason, because we'll need the same number of people. We'll need 700 million to feed them. And you can imagine twice. We'll need the same number of police officers, around 80,000, because there are 2 per polling station, which is 40,000. We'll need the same polling clerks, DROs and ROs. We'll need the same commissioners and the same secretariat. So in my own opinion, although I don't want to preempt any proposal in the future, is staggering of elections in this country will be more expensive, because we are dealing with more $1 per voter as we talk, which is quite expensive across the world. Yeah.
Presidential election, more time?
Yeah, of course, I agree there should be more time, because 14 days is a bit limiting, be filing and submitting and also conclusion. I think when you look at that jurisdiction, we need around 30 days to 3 months to look, so that by the time the Supreme Court pronounce itself, the petitioner or the respondent are satisfied with the decision of the court. Yes.
Thank you very much. Senate Justice Legal JLAC Committee. It is the Justice and Legal Affairs Committee of the Senate. Samson Cherargei speaking with us there on the state of the IEBC. Going forward, what to expect. Of course, the commission itself, in terms of the commissioners and the composition, remaining to be shambolic, but there is a promise that very soon there will be a legislation proposal in place, perhaps to ensure that issue is fixed. Sharon.
Many thanks, Sophia Wanuna there, our lead reporter, speaking to Senator Samson Cherargei, the chair of Senate JLAC, on the state of the IEBC, which is our big story tonight. I'll be pursuing that conversation here in studio, critical issues that conversation has set for a conversation here in studio, which I will be having with Marcus Agenga. Marcus is a senior programs manager at ELOG, Elections Observation Group here in Kenya. Thank you, Marcus, for joining us here in studio tonight. We also have Duncan Okach, who is a lawyer, and will be adding to this conversation in just a bit. But before we get into it, we want to take a short break and come back for that conversation. Stay with us.
This is KTN News.